Kingdom Cup Part 2. Yeah, if you missed my first video, this is Part 2, going over a Kingdom Cup analysis here. Part 1, link in the description, covers the pentafecta we got going on here. And this video, Part 2, is going to be covering the wild cards. This video, once again, is following the article, The Kingdom Cup Meta, by Lorma96 on Game Press. Both of us collabed on this, but I do have to say that Lorma did like 99.999% of the work here. I've just been really tied up this past month, but I am here to give you this information in video format. But if you'd like to reference any of this information in text format, definitely check out this article on Game Press, link in the description. So starting out with the wild cards, we have Steelix. And the main reason why you want to use Steelix is to just shut down Bastodon, or I guess anybody in this steel type corner. Yeah, they really don't want to deal with Steelix. Even with Flamethrower, Bastodon, with max shields, we'll end up losing to Steelix if Steelix is, responding with similar amount of shields. So definitely shutting down Bastodon there. And another cool thing about Steelix, the cool thing that Steelix has always had going on, is that it just shuts down Altaria. I can also give some decent harassment to the Ice-type boys over here, but if Lapras is using Water Gun, then Steelix has a even rougher time in that matchup. Now, the reason why Steelix is a little bit more of a wild card compared to most Pokemon is that it doesn't behave in a simple manner, right? So you got like Lucario, you got this corner countering these two sides, this corner countering these two sides, and so on. Well, with Steelix, Steelix is like you're countering this corner and that corner. And all three of the other corners pretty much handle you in one way or another. While you do have an okay matchup against the ice types here, ultimately they should be beating Steelix. But Steelix isn't built to behave like these other Pokemon, no, and that's where you can get the advantage in, where if your opponent is using like a Altaria with Bastodon Core, maybe they're backing up their Lucario with that, well then now you've got a Pokemon that can handle two of those Pokemon. Of course, this dream can be lost a little bit if your opponent is using a Charizard. One thing that is kind of interesting though is a good combo with this wild card is yet another wild card, which is Alolan Marowak. Yeah, so Steelix harasses Altaria, harasses the steel types. Alolan Marowak doesn't really like dealing with Altaria, and truth be told, even though it can have a positive matchup against the steel types, it really doesn't like dealing with it either. So segueing into Alolan Marowak, the main use for Alolan Marowak is to counter the counter users, right? Yeah, you got the ghost type resistance, so their fighting type hits don't really do much to you. So in this sense, it's kind of like an honorary member of the flying type crew over here. Some cool advantages that Alolan Marowak poses over them too is that it doesn't exactly have a losing matchup against Bastodon. Given the right circumstances, that Bone Club damage does a pretty big number on it and could potentially give you the win. And it's not too shabby against Lapras either. Unless it's running Water Gun, of course, then Lapras is just going to absolutely shut you down. Yeah, so you might be thinking, Ryan Swag, why don't I just use a Alolan Marowak instead of one of these flying type Pokemon? Well, one big issue that you have is that Lucario has Shadow Ball, and if it hits you with one Shadow Ball, you're kind of out of there. Another issue that it has is that it absolutely loses against the Flygon. So while your Shadow Ball could take out the Flygon, it's most likely that Flygon's going to take you out before you have the opportunity to take it out. So that's another detriment to using the Alolan Marowak. That aside, Alolan Marowak is a really solid Pokemon to consider for your team, especially if you are using a Steelix. Now, there is also some debate on which fast move to use on it, Rock Smash or Hex. Rock Smash does hit Lucario super effective and makes that matchup more consistent as you're not relying on your charge moves to take it out, which means that the threat of Shadow Ball, like you have less opportunities to lose to Shadow Ball, if that makes sense. And when it comes to the Bastodon, that is doubly super effective. But I feel overall using the Hex will improve all of your other matchups, and you're already performing like as well in your other matchups anyways, Rock Smash versus Hex. So I think the consistency boost is more important, and I definitely side with Hex in that regard. Another cool thing with Hex is that it can allow you to take down Charizard, where if you use Rock Smash, you start to fall a little bit off the mark there. So to kind of show you the cool combination of Steelix and Alolan Marowak here, I got this pulled up in MS Paint. Yeah, so let's get green color here for Steelix. I know it'd make a little bit more sense for Alolan Marowak. I don't care. So yeah, so you got Steelix here, and he's shutting down this side of the fence, right? So no concerns there. And then Steelix is also taking down the Altaria, And then I'm just going to put a single slash through these guys since it's kind of a soft counter, right? Then you got Alola Marowak, and let's give him a nice orange. Just an annoying color to stand out a little bit. So Alola Marowak, he's orange. And that guy, he's taking down the Lucario. Freaking Blaziken does not even want to think about him. There we go. Yeah. Charizard, taken out. And then you got another soft counter for the Lapras-Celio combo. So you're taking a peek at this. Oh yeah, and then I guess you also get another soft counter in here against these guys since, you know, you do got the Bone Club, right? So taking a look at this map, what Pokemon is there to be afraid of? Well, you got this sneaky little Flygon over here, right? And which Pokemon aren't really threatening you? Well, this corner over here. So who would be a good partner for a Alola Marowak Steelix Core? Well, Pokemon that are threatened by these guys. So I feel like Lapras or Celio could work out comboing there, or maybe even Altaria would probably be a good combo for that core. Or you could get extra spicy here and go with Dragonair. So yeah, Dragonair here. Dragonair feels kind of like the hidden master of the Kingdom Cup in a way. You lose to Lucario more often than not, so that is a detriment, but most things in this cup are going to be losing to Lucario, so, you know, no real love lost there, right? But Dragonair does do Bastodon pretty dirty with that Aqua Tail, which actually causes a positive matchup more often than not. When you're up against Lapras, if it's Water Gun Lapras, well, Lapras is in trouble. But if it's Ice Shard Lapras, well, now Dragonair is kind of in trouble. And against Altaria, the matchup isn't exactly lost. If Altaria does one misstep as far as charge moves or dodging charge moves go, Dragonair can get the advantage. So the main charge move that your Dragonair is going to be using is Aqua Tail, but as far as springing for a secondary charge move, there is a bit of a debate between using Wrap or Dragon Pulse. If you use Dragon Pulse, that does have a bit more power. It does help you take out the Altaria much more easily, and makes the Flygon matchup a little bit more consistent, but you should be dominating Flygon anyways, so not that big of a deal. But if you use the Wrap does come earlier. So the Wrap could allow you to clean up a matchup that you wouldn't be able to clean up with Aqua Tail if the situation was dire and to the point like that. The way I feel like Dragonair is going to be used is to just take stuff down with the Dragon Breath and Aqua Tail damage, and in the second fight, it may already have some energy stored up. So with that in mind, I feel like Dragon Pulse might be a bit better because it will help turn the tides in some of its losing matchups a bit better than Wrap would. But it's ultimately up to your, discretion which charge move you want to use. Yeah. Oh yeah, and very clearly, even though I didn't explicitly say it, the Aqua Tail Fire-type Pokemon, they don't really appreciate it. One thing I think is kind of interesting, though, checking out the simulation data on Dragonair, is that even though it has a positive matchup against Bastodon, it actually loses to Steelix, which is kind of like the Bastodon analog. Like, they're both weak to water, right? But because Steelix has that fast move damage with Dragon Tail and the earlier charge move with Crunch, it's actually able to get the one over on Dragonair in most situations, so that's kind of interesting. So if you're thinking about sleeping on Steelix before, like, why would I need a Steelix? I already got a Bastodon. Well, you might want to take a second look at Steelix, because it ain't no chump against Dragonair, like some big ugly face boy is. So next up on our list is the Waterfall Emperor Empoleon. Yeah, so Empoleon with the Waterfall actually puts pressure on just about everything in this cup with the raw damage of Waterfall and Empoleon's resistances, since rock moves, ice moves, water type moves, dragon type moves, fire type moves really aren't phasing Empoleon too much. And then when you've got Blaziken here with its counter damage, does make Empoleon sweat a little bit. Well, the Waterfall damage definitely gonna make Blaziken sweat. Yeah. So problems with Empoleon is that it does have a losing matchup to Lucario, like a lot of things do, and it's not exactly beating Lapras all the time, so that's also kind of a problem for it as well. And then Melmetal just shuts it down in a pretty big way. That said, Empoleon as a late game kind of sweeper sounds pretty dangerous. It's kind of like Tentacruel in a way, but instead of using that nuke charge move to kind of clean things out, it just has that big old fast move to slap things down. And if you do get to your charge move, well, heck man, that's even better. As far as the charge move choice goes, you could use Blizzard to try to threaten the dragon types a bit more. Maybe you whittled something down with your Waterfall damage and now the dragon's in and you're like, I got the Blizzard, man. but I actually like Hydro Pump and Flash Cannon a little bit more. Ultimately, it's up to your discretion which charge move combinations you want to use. I can't say I am the Empoleon master. I haven't taken too close of a look at his simulations, so if you're checking the sims and you feel like for your team or from what you're seeing, Blizzard would be a more consistent move, then I'd say absolutely go with that. Trust your instincts over mine because, as I told you at the beginning of the video, I haven't spent a whole lot of time with Kingdom Cup. Then moving on over, we have the other Waterfall user, which is Kingdra. What do I want to say about Kingdra? Not as good as Empoleon, but can beat Watergun Lapras, takes a bigger W to Zard, takes a bigger L to Altaria. Okay, so you might be thinking, Kingdra, Waterfall user, it's going to be doing the same exact thing as Empoleon, but in PvP, resistances are key, and Steel-type resistances and Dragon-type resistances are two different animals. So without the Steel typing, your matchup is going to be a bit more rough against the Bastodon, which is a neg. But there are some positives to using the Kingdra over the Empoleon here. For one, your margin of victory over Charizard is going to be much larger than what it is for Empoleon. But to kind of counterbalance that, your win margin against Altaria is going to be much lower because you're hitting it with water type damage. Then when it comes to Lapras with Water Gun is giving Empoleon some issues where the Ice Shard variant isn't. Well, it's kind of the inverse here, where Kingdra doing really well against the Water Gun variant, taking, the doubled up resistance to the water type attacks, but not doing so hot against the Ice Shard variant. When comparing the two, the main defining thing that I think happens for them is how you're going to use them in your team. Do you want to take bigger wins against Bastodon? Well, then you'll probably want to use Empoleon. But do you want to have an improved rate of victory with cleaning up the counter users? Well, then you might want to go with Kingdra, since Kingdra won't be taking super effective hits from it. So, are you cleaning up boosted Lucarios, or are you trying to clean up Bastodon? Which Lapras is giving you the most harassment? I think that's what would define which Waterfall user you'd want to use. And when it comes to Kingdra, you could also maybe think about using Water Gun or maybe Dragon Breath. I feel overall Water Gun, even though it does allow you to use earlier charge moves, Kingdra's charge moves come too late as it is already, so you may as well sacrifice the ability to do your 1 or 2 charge moves a little bit earlier for doing just more damage in general. And then when it comes to Dragon Breath, it could give you a little bit more of a surprise pop against Lapras and Flygon and Altaria, but it really doesn't flip the matchup in your favor for the most part. So I don't think it's necessarily worth it. But if you see how it could work out in your team where using Dragon Breath and potentially surprising your opponent with Dragon Breath usage works out, well then that's up to you. But I'd say if you're using Kingdra, you might want to stick to the Waterfall. I think Kingdra is the perfect example of a Pokemon who could really explode in value if it got just an earlier charge move, like Aqua Tail or even Twister. Even though Twister is pretty bad, even Twister could make Kingdra like way better than it is now. But unfortunately, Kingdra's charge moves just cost a little bit too much. Yeah. Alright, then moving on down, we have the Ice types. And to be honest, I'm not really feeling the Ice types in this meta. I mean, their main use would be to counter Altaria and Flygon, but I don't expect to see Flygon and Altaria in the same team. So, more often than not, bringing in the Ice types will give you a losing matchup against literally everything else. And then when it comes to ideal team compositions, using a Flying type Pokemon, people might just side with Charizard, or maybe even Alolan Marowak. And then when it comes to the Lucario counter, well, Blaziken does it much better than Flygon does to begin with. So I really don't see a whole lot of value in the Ice types. And if you're thinking about Dragonair, yeah, actually the matchup is pretty dicey for them because they're pretty frail for the most part, and the Aqua Tail damage combined with the Dragon type damage from Dragon Breath really does wail on them in a pretty big way. So I'm really not feeling a whole lot of love for the Ice types. One thing I will give a shout out for is the Piloswine, because you do have that Bulldoze damage, which could tilt the odds in your favor against like a Bastodon, who take doubly super effective damage to it. But it's really not consistent enough to really be a Bastodon counter, so I don't know. I'm not really feeling the Ice types. If you've got a bigger brain idea as far as using them on your team, they can work. They're not terrible Pokemon to use in this particular cup, but I feel like if you're using an Ice type, you may as well use Celio or Lapras. I feel like they do the Ice type role just a lot better than them. Then finally, we got Bronzong, the Bell of Doom here, for one Pokemon in particular, and that's Blaziken. Yeah, Bronzong just destroys Blaziken with the confusion damage. You can also finesse a win against the Lucario. It might not happen, but if you don't shield their first charge move and their first charge move is Power Up Punch, you could flip that matchup in your favor. But it is pretty dicey, I will have to say. So Bronzong might not exactly be the best option against Lucario, but it does pack in some solid threat with the neutral, heavy confusion damage. It also bullies Lapras pretty well too. The best way I'm thinking about using Bronzong is kind of for those cores that are using Bastodon. So Bastodon gets doubly harassed by Blaziken and Flygon, and I feel like Blaziken and Flygon on a team as a core to counter Lucario and Bastodon is pretty strong. So if you're fighting against an opponent and you see that they're doing that and you're packing the Bronzong, you might want to flip out the Bastodon for the Bronzong, still maintaining Bastodon's main role of harassing the flying types. I know Charizard gets a little bit tougher, and harassing Lapras, which once again is no longer a matchup that's completely in your favor, but in doing so, you just body this guy here and then pack in some solid harassment onto the Flygon as well. So I think that's definitely in Bronzong's favor in that sense. And then by taking out either of these two Pokemon or heavily crippling one of them or the other, could pave the way for your Lucario to have an easier time. And then of course, just like any other Bastodon Lucario core, you just have to combo them with Altaria or Lapras to smooth out the rest of your matchups. I think that'd work out pretty well. For other players that aren't using a Bastodon Lucario core, I don't see a whole lot of value in Bronzong, and Bronzong's already a hyper-exclusive Pokemon to begin with. So in a sense, Bronzong is kind of like the royalty's secret weapon to suppress the uprising of the anti-meta Pokemon over here. I think that's a good way to put it. You know, the rogue nation of Blaziken Flygon is threatening the holy union of Lucario Bastodon. We bring out the holy bell to cleanse this land. I don't know. That's how I see Bronzong working out. But for players that aren't using Lucario or aren't using the Lucario Bastodon core, I don't think Bronzong is going to be as effective. So there you have it. Those are my thoughts on the wild card picks for the Kingdom Cup meta. Just as a reminder, this is part 2 of a 2-part series on the Kingdom Cup. Link in the description to part 1, where I talk about the Pentafecta here in a little bit more detail. I do have to warn you that the audio is kind of really quiet on that video. So on my mic here, I got this little nubby. I didn't realize that I had the nubby all the way to quiet when I made it, and then we were editing it, and I was like, oh shoot man, I don't want to re-record it. I'm lazy, and I wait till the last minute to do this stuff, so sucks, right? Yeah. But if listening to the audio doesn't really work out too well for you, well then you can always check out this article on GamePress, and then you can read up on the Pentafecta there. The Pentafecta is pretty straightforward though. If you got any questions on the Kingdom Cup meta, comment below in the description, and I'll be happy to help you out. And this, once again, is a cup that I am aiming to participate in. I wasn't able to participate in the Tempest Cup because my schedule it didn't work out for me. But Kingdom Cup, I am getting aggressive on. I do have my team mostly put together. I just gotta find myself small enough Torchics so I can evolve into a Blaziken, because heaven knows I absolutely do not have a frickin' Lucario here, so yeah. Oh, and we also got a special announcement from Ludicolo here. Alright, you heard it from the man himself. You best be subscribing to SwagTips. One other alternative pick I do want to highlight though, that's kind of glossed over a little bit in this article, is the cast form with Ember and Weather Ball. I'm just going to call Weather Ball Fireball because we're using the fire type of cast form, right? So Fireball is actually the best fire type charge move in the game right now, all things considered. From a DPE standpoint, I think Overheat, Fire Blast, and then of course Blast Burn are going to be better, but the cost of all three of those charge moves are extremely steep, to the point where these fire type attacks don't see a whole lot of use in the game. But cast form with the Fireball whips out those fire type charge moves pretty quick. Now I will caution you, it's definitely not a top pick for this meta, but from the simulations I ran, in a lot of matchups, if your opponent doesn't shield the first Fireball, things just fall into Castform's favor there. So if your opponent underestimates the power of Castform, you could get the one over on them with Castform, which I think is pretty ridiculous. So if you are doing a early Kingdom Cup kind of tournament with your local crew and you just need that 6th slot Pokemon to just kind of close your team together, maybe use Castform. It's the kind of Pokemon that they won't lose to twice, but they might lose to once. And I mean, if that's all you need to get the victory secured, then it's all you need, right?